Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Buckeye Politics. It's me, your favorite Ohioan. So today we're going to be looking at the results of the 2022 Wisconsin primary elections. There are a couple other primaries that happened in like Minnesota, Connecticut, Vermont, and there's also a special election which we will look at as well. But really, the big primary was in the state of Wisconsin. So let's get right into it. Look at the Democratic primary very quickly. Not a lot of the vote has been counted because this result was pretty much guaranteed. Tony Evers, the incumbent Democratic governor, who is not very well liked statewide. Among Democrats, he's pretty popular, so he didn't face any challenge. But statewide, he has a pretty low approval rating, and so whoever the Republican nominee is more likely than not going to become the governor. It's going to be a tighter race than like some people expect, but overall, it's leaned to possibly likely are. So yeah, so Tony Evers winning the Democratic primary, really nothing surprising there. Nothing to talk about. He didn't even have an opponent. It was literally just him and then a couple write-ins in like some more rural counties, but yeah, that's usually expected. We come down here and look at the Republican primary, which was the big primary of the night. This was supposed to be one of the most, if not the most, competitive primary of the cycle. Tim Michels, who is a businessman who was endorsed by former President Donald Trump, he was lagging behind in the polls pretty much all of the spring and summer. This race was pretty much Rebecca Kleefisch, who is the former lieutenant governor under Scott Walker. She's been in politics for a long time. She's a very well known across the state of Wisconsin among Republicans, moderates, independents, Democrats. Everyone knows who Rebecca Kleefisch is, and she's more of a, I guess you could say, libertarian Republican. She's socially, I guess, center right, fiscally also pretty like populist. She's basically just she's a slightly more moderate to more I guess libertarian Republican. She's not like a bad candidate by any stretch of the imagination. She's just more moderate than I guess your average Republican voter is. And for a state like Wisconsin, which is a very populist state, they're big fans of economic populism. They're not very Wisconsin's not really like a libertarian state. It's a more America First, populist kind of state, and that is where Tim Michels comes in. So, like I said, we made a video on Tim Michels, and Tim Michels, he's a very populist candidate. He wants to expand broadband. He wants to use money to bring back manufacturing jobs to the state of Wisconsin, and he wants to actually wield power as the governorship and kind of not just kind of let the market handle itself. And so that's a solid platform for a very populous state like Wisconsin. That said, because Kleefisch was very well known and had the backing of many major donors and many big figures in Wisconsin politics, this race was supposed to be very competitive. Michels basically only had the endorsement of Trump. Basically every Republican in Wisconsin supported Kleefisch, and the polls showed this race razor thin. But in the end, Tim Michels did come out with actually a very solid victory. He's won by about a little more than 5 points. Most polls had this race being like Michels +1, Kleefisch +1. Like this race was supposed to come down to the wire, but very early on it became apparent that Michels would win this election, and he did go on to win pretty handily. Actually, I mean 5 points isn't a huge margin of victory, but for a primary that was supposed to be very competitive against a very strong opponent in Rebecca Kleefisch, Tim Michels did very well. And so you may be wondering, like, why did Michels do so well in this primary? And there's a couple of answers to that question, but I think the big one is actually the FBI's raid of Trump's house in Mar-a-Lago. Now, the FBI raiding Trump's house is disgusting, it's unprecedented, and it shows just how corrupt the system is. That's all I'm going to say about that for now. But the thing is, Rebecca Kleefisch did not have a very strong response to that, to the raid. She basically just said, "Oh, it was wrong, and I'm thinking about Trump." That's literally all she said. Well, Michels went all in out there, and he was like, "This is wrong. We have to investigate this. We have to get to the bottom of this. And we have to make sure that the DOJ and FBI are not being manipulated for political gain." And that, I think, really inspired a lot of Republicans. I've heard some stuff online that a lot of voters who are leaning towards Kleefisch but were pretty much undecided or didn't like Kleefisch's very monotone and just generic response. So a lot of Republican voters actually flipped to Tim Michels, or many undecideds went to Tim Michels because of what happened in Mar-a-Lago. So, you know what, FBI, thank you. You managed to get us a solid win in Wisconsin. So if there's any good that comes out of the FBI being used for political gain, it's the fact that Wisconsin is going to have an incredible governor next year. So yeah, Tim Michels did very well in the rural driftless area. So where there was the suburbs of Milwaukee, the WOW counties as they're called, which is Washington, Waukesha, and Walworth, and you could possibly add Ozaukee in there as well, and then maybe Racine and Kenosha, but they're kind of their own thing. But yeah, so the thing is, in Wisconsin, the rural areas, basically this whole area up here, was always a pretty Democratic-leaning area. It was always very working class, very blue collar, very unionized, and so a lot of these voters always voted Democratic. But that said, when Trump came along and he kind of moderated his stance on things like trade, immigration, and made the Republican Party more of like a working class party, these are the voters that flipped to Trump and made Wisconsin a swing state that's probably going to end up becoming a Republican state by the end of the decade, because these voters are still slowly but surely becoming Republicans, while Democrats are pretty much maxed out in Madison and Milwaukee. That said, the WOW counties here, do vote for Trump pretty handily, but they're very suburban and they're a lot more moderate. I mean, they're not moderate; they're more like establishment Republicans. They're not like anti-Trump, but they do tend to favor more establishment Republicans. And so it was expected that Rebecca Kleefisch would do very well around here, while Tim Michels would do better in the more rural parts of the state. That said, Michels actually did very well in the wild counties. He won Washington County very handily, which no one expected. Washington County is, like I said, it's a wild county. It's usually pretty establishmentarian. It's a little bit more moderate. It's a little bit more, I guess, generic Republican. While which is perfect for Rebecca Kleefisch, and she's actually from this part of the state. Kleefisch is from, I believe, Fond du Lac County. They're both from this part of the state, or maybe she's from Jefferson. They're both, I don't know. Michels and Kleefisch are both from this part of the state, and so, but yeah, Kleefisch did pretty bad in Washington. She lost Washington handily. She only won Ozaukee by about 5. She only won Waukesha by about 7 points, and she only won Walworth by like 2. And then Tim Michels won both Racine and Kenosha counties pretty handily. They were a little bit closer than people expected, but he won both of them pretty handily, as well as Milwaukee. Milwaukee County only went to Kleefisch by like 4 points. So overall, the part of the state that Kleefisch had to do well and to win was the like southeastern part of the state and the more suburban, moderate parts of the state. And Tim Michels did very well there, and that's why he managed to win. The only outlier county was actually Brown County. This is home to Green Bay. For those of you who do not know, the city of Green Bay is actually a solidly Republican city. It votes Republican. It's like it's always voted Republican, and with Trump being a more populist, America First Republican, it's actually trending a little bit more Republican. So, but yeah, Green Bay is usually it's a solid Republican area, and it actually voted for Kleefisch by about 4 points. That was kind of a surprise, as well as Marathon County. Marathon County is a more suburban, establishment-leaning county, but still, Michels had a lot of support in this part of the state in general. So it's kind of a surprise that Marathon County voted so heavily for Kleefisch. And then, like I said, the rest of the state, it was really just the suburbs that Kleefisch did well in. And looking at Kenosha and Racine, Tim Michels has made a big part of his campaign, and by the fact that Kenosha got burned by Black Lives Matter back in 2020, and Evers didn't have a good response, so it makes sense that Michels would do well there. He won the county pretty handily, as did Racine, like Kenosha's neighbor to the north. But the big thing I want to look at is the fact of how well Michels did in these rural counties. Let's look at these counties up here: Douglas, Bayfield, and Ashland counties. These are counties that are very unionized. They're basically all white, basically all working class, basically very unionized counties. They're on Lake Superior, and they're part of like the Iron Range. And they actually voted Democrat in 2020, but they're trending Republican. Look how well Michels did up here. He won Douglas County by 24 points. He won Bayfield County by like 30 or 40 points. He got 61% of the vote there. Tim Michels won Bayfield County 61-25. That is an absolute landslide. And he also did very well in Ashland, 65-22. So this northern part of the state, ancestral Democratic areas, places full of people who have voted Democrat for their entire lives. They're blue collar workers in unions. They voted heavily for Tim Michels, which is a great sign for November. These are voters that Tony Evers would have to do well with to win. And these voters do not like Tony Evers, and it's very clear they love Tim Michels. Look at Iron County, 61-27. Vilas, 51-37. And as you see here, you head to the more like I guess generic counties. It narrows up a bit. But let's look at the WOW counties. Let's look at Jackson County, 59-24, 52-31, 53-29. And then Iowa, some of the exurban counties outside of Madison. Michels also did very well there. He won them by like 10 points or so. So yeah, overall, if you look at the rural parts of the state, the ancestral Democratic parts of the state, that is where Tim Michels did very well, and he has best performances. And he also did very well in the Milwaukee suburbs, which is a great sign for November for the Republican Party. We talked about that race for a while. Let's go to the Senate race. There wasn't a whole lot going on there. Mandela Barnes, he's gonna get his ass kicked. He's a horrible candidate. For those of you who do not know, Mandela Barnes is literally a black nationalist. He's currently serving as the lieutenant governor of Wisconsin. This is a guy who said the founding of America was awful and it was racist. And he also launched an ad where he says he would have been okay if his mom aborted him. Yeah, that's gonna win a statewide election. Meanwhile, incumbent Senator Ron Johnson, who was very popular in the state, he got 83.6% of the vote, winning every single county very handily. He also did pretty well in the northern parts of the state that he had to do well in, and he also did solidly in the suburbs. And so, because of that, I think Ron Johnson's going to go on to win handily. And if you look at the race, Ron Johnson got 564,000 votes. If you add up all the Democratic votes, 389, 44, 40, in a competitive primary, in a primary that's supposed to be very close, Ron Johnson got more votes in total than all the Democratic candidates combined. And even then, he only got 83% of the Republican votes. There's still another 110,000 votes out there. Yeah, Johnson's going to win pretty handily. There really aren't any other races to look at. Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, pretty much as expected. So let's go look at the let's go through the line. Let's go to Connecticut real quickly. Not a whole lot to say here. Laura Levy is the more Trumpian candidate. She's a more populist Republican. She's pretty conservative. She won the primary about 10 points over the more moderate Themis Clerdis. Laura Levy did very well across the eastern part of the state among the slightly more working class voters, while Themis Clerdis did very well among the more wealthy, more elitist suburban areas. And Laura Levy also did pretty well in this part of the state, which is a little bit more working class. Although for some reason, Themis Clerdis did very well in like the top northwest corner of the state. Not really sure why, but she did. So yeah, this race is I wanted Laura Levy to win. She's not going to win the general election. I know she's not going to win. But the thing is, if we nominated a moderate establishment Republican, the RNC would have put a bunch of money into the race, thinking, oh, we could win because our nominee's a moderate. But they're not going to win. And so this saves money that we can use in states that are actually competitive. And even if somehow Laura Levy does pull off a win, she's just a better candidate. So not a whole lot to say there. Let's go over to the Minnesota primaries. Minnesota governor primary, Tim Walz, the incumbent Democrat. Like I said, he did very well. Not a whole lot to say there. Scott Jensen, who is a doctor and currently a state representative, he also did very well. In the Republican primary, he won every single county pretty handily. Not a whole lot to say here. Scott Jensen didn't. The Republicans in Minnesota did not turn out as well as I thought they did. I mean, Scott Jensen only got 289,000, and these voters had a few thousand here, and even that's nowhere even close to how well Tim Walz did. So it is interesting to see that Republicans did not turn out very well in Minnesota, which is interesting, and that leads us to the other election. You go over here. There was actually a special election in Minnesota, and that is the first district where Feinstad, the Republican, received 51% of the vote, and Ettinger received 46.9%. This is a district that voted for Donald Trump very handily. As you can see, Brad Finstad got 51%, Jeff Ettinger, the Democrat, got 46%. A lot of people online have been saying, look, this proves that Democrats are turning out in a blue wave. But first off, as we just saw in the governor, looking at the governor primary, Republicans, for whatever reason, did not turn out. There is way more Democrats voted in the primary statewide than Republicans did. For some reason, I'm not really sure why, but for whatever reason, that did happen. So first off, in this special election, there were already probably more Democrats than Republicans that turned out, or at least a higher percentage of Democrats that turned out than there probably normally is. Second of all, Jeff Ettinger is a very moderate Democrat, and he's very well known across the district. He owns a bunch of businesses and stores. I believe, yeah, he owns a bunch of stores across the district, and it's kind of like corner stores. So literally everyone in this district probably knows who he is, or at least knows his store. And he also ran a very moderate campaign. Obviously, that's going to help him out there. And even then, Brad Feinstad still outperformed the Republican nominee back in 2020. And like I said, this is a district that, yeah, Trump won it by like 10, but the Republicans only won it by like 1 or 2 in the House. Why is that? It's because there are a lot of ancestral Democrats, like we talked about in Wisconsin, blue-collar Democrats who have voted Democrat their entire lives, who voted for Trump, but then voted for the Democrat on the rest of the ballot. In the lower ballot, they voted Trump for president, but then they voted Democrat down ballot. All the rest of elections, they voted Democratic. And so this race, yeah, sure, it was a Trump plus 10 district, but Republicans only won here by like 3 points. That said, we won here by also like 3 points in 2022, and it's probably going to stay red in the fall. So like I said, not a whole lot to say here. Pretty much what we expect here. Republicans won the race. I don't really know a whole lot about Brad Feinstad, but a lot of people, I just want to talk about it because a lot of people have been saying, oh, look, this means Democrats are going to do well because they made this race close. But it's like, no. If you look at the nuances, it was going to be close. The last race we're going to talk about is the Vermont primaries. Really not a whole lot to say here. Let's go to the Senate race is really the only, I guess you'd say, quote-unquote competitive race. For the Republicans, we had a couple candidates running. We had kind of an upset, actually. We had Christina Nolan, who is a more moderate Republican, and I expected her to win somehow, but she did not. She lost to Jared Malloy, who is a much more conservative candidate, and he did very well across southern Vermont and parts of the eastern and northeastern part of Vermont, while Nolan did very well in the more suburban, I guess you'd say, central and northwestern part of the state. Jared Malloy's, he's not going to win the general election. He's not going to win at all. He's not even going to come close, but he is still more conservative than Christina Nolan. Christina Nolan, like I said, I wanted her to lose because, I mean, yes, she had a better chance at winning, but still, that chance of winning was incredibly slim, and I mean incredibly slim. And because it would be possibly close, the Republicans would probably pour a bunch of money into the race only for Nolan to lose by like 10. So, like I said, I'm glad that Jared Malloy won because all this race would have done is waste resources that we could spend in states like Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, some places like that. So overall, I'm glad Malloy won. Going to the governor race, Phil Scott, the very moderate Republican governor, he won his primary pretty handily, actually. Stephen Ballos, who's a little bit more conservative, actually won a few townships, which is good to see. It means that some Republicans in the state are not big fans of Phil Scott. He actually did much worse than I thought. He only got 69% of the vote. Nice. But anyway, like I said, not a whole lot to say here. Phil Scott's going to go on to win the general election very handily. But it is good to see that there are some Republicans in Vermont who are basically saying, we don't like you being so moderate. Maybe be a little bit more conservative, because you're going to win your election no matter what, unless you go full-on Trumpian, which is not going to. But, you know, you could at least pass a few conservative acts and pass some little conservative legislation. So overall, a pretty solid night for Republicans and the America First movement. I'm very happy with the results, and I hope you are too. And if you are, please like and subscribe. We're going to have more videos coming out. This is basically the last primary, so from here on out, it's going to be kind of pushed November. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you for watching.